The sun rose slowly over the dry, dusty land of the frontier, casting a golden light across the rolling hills and the small ranch that sat quietly at the edge of the plains. The ranch itself was modest, nothing more than a few wooden buildings with roofs patched in places where the winter storms had left their mark. A simple fence ran around the property, enclosing a handful of cattle that wandered lazily in the early morning light. Smoke rose from the chimney of the small log cabin, curling into the sky as if it were greeting the new day. Inside the cabin, the rancher, a man known for his honesty and hard work, was already awake. His name was Thomas McAllister, and though he was poor by most standards, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that came from living a life guided by principle. Thomas had spent all his life on the land. He knew the hills and valleys like the back of his hand. He knew which streams ran year-round, where the grass grew green even in the driest months, and how to calm a frightened horse with just a gentle touch. Despite his poverty, Thomas's cabin was neat and orderly. Every tool had its place. Every pot, pan, and broom sat where it was supposed to be. His few belongings were well cared for, not because they were valuable in the eyes of others, but because they were the fruits of his labor. Thomas believed in respecting the work of his own hands and in keeping what little he had in good order. He believed that life might not give him much, but it could still be treated with care and pride. The day began like any other, with Thomas stepping outside into the crisp morning air. He greeted the sun as if it were an old friend and walked toward the small herd of cattle that grazed quietly on the sparse grass. The cows raised their heads and looked at him with familiar eyes, trusting him completely. Thomas's gentle voice called to them, and he led them to the water trough, filling it from the well with steady, practiced motions. It was a small act, routine to some, but to Thomas, it was part of the rhythm of life he loved so dearly. His hands, rough and calloused from years of work, moved with confidence. He repaired fences, checking each post to make sure it could withstand the winds that sometimes swept across the plains. Even in winter, when the snow piled high and made every step treacherous, Thomas would walk the perimeter, ensuring that none of his cattle were lost or injured. To him, this was more than labor. It was responsibility, and responsibility was something he never took lightly. But life on the frontier was not easy. Neighbors often spoke of danger, warning Thomas about the Apache tribes that roamed the region, searching for food or defending their own lands. Many settlers reacted with fear or hostility, preparing weapons and fortifying homes. Some even spread stories that made the Apache seem like monsters, but Thomas had never believed in treating people, or tribes, with hatred. He had seen them in the distance, watched them hunt and ride with skill, and he respected them for their courage and knowledge of the land. Fear, he believed, should never guide one's actions. Kindness and understanding should. Thomas's reputation as a kind man had grown quietly over the years. He was known in nearby towns as someone who would help anyone in need, whether they were settlers, travelers, or even members of the tribes. He never asked for thanks or recognition. He only did what he thought was right. Once, a merchant whose wagon had broken down on the rough trail had stumbled into Thomas's ranch. The merchant was tired, hungry, and anxious about making it to the next town. Thomas had offered him food, water, and a place to rest for the night, refusing any payment. The merchant later told others that Thomas McAllister's generosity had saved his life. Stories like this spread slowly, but they built a quiet legend. Thomas was a man who lived by his heart, not by fear or greed. Yet despite his kind nature, Thomas's life was filled with challenges. Poverty was a constant companion. Some mornings, the pantry held little more than a few potatoes and a bit of flour. Sometimes the cattle didn't yield enough milk, or the rains failed to come, leaving the grass dry and brown. Each day was a test of endurance, but Thomas never let hardship harden his spirit. Instead, he faced each obstacle with patience and determination. He worked long hours from sunrise to sunset, believing that sweat and effort were more valuable than gold. In his heart, he knew that wealth was measured not by money, but by the strength of one's character and the kindness one showed to others. On one particular morning, as Thomas walked along the ridge behind his cabin, he noticed a thin column of dust rising in the distance. His first instinct was caution. Dust often meant travelers, but sometimes it signaled danger. He squinted, scanning the horizon, and saw a lone rider struggling along the trail. The man looked exhausted, his horse moving slowly and unevenly across the rough terrain. Without hesitation, Thomas grabbed a blanket and a small jug of water and headed down the hill to meet him. The rider, grateful but wary, accepted Thomas's help. He explained that he had been traveling for days, lost in the heat and wind with little food or water. Thomas offered him bread, cheese, and fresh water, and guided the horse to a small corral where it could rest. While the rider ate and drank, Thomas listened quietly, nodding and offering advice on the safest routes ahead. There was no rush, no sense of obligation, just genuine concern for a fellow human being. By the time the man left, he carried with him not only nourishment but a deep respect for the humble rancher who had helped him without asking for anything in return. The simplicity of life at the ranch did not mean it was lonely. Thomas had neighbors scattered across the plains, and sometimes children from nearby settlements would wander over, curious about the rancher who always had time for a story or a lesson in animal care. Thomas enjoyed teaching them, showing them how to mend fences, identify animal tracks, and survive in the wilderness. He believed that knowledge was a gift, and sharing it was a way to shape the future of the land he loved. He often said that if kindness and wisdom were planted like seeds, they would grow far stronger than any fence or wall ever could. Evenings at the ranch were quiet but filled with small joys. Thomas would sit by the fire, repairing tools or preparing for the next day. The smell of cooking meat or bread often filled the cabin, a reminder that even the simplest meals could bring comfort. The stars stretched across the sky like a sparkling blanket, and Thomas would look out, imagining the vast world beyond the hills he knew so well. He often thought about the people he had met, the challenges he had faced, and the little acts of kindness that had shaped his life. In his heart, he believed that no act of goodness was ever wasted, and that even in a harsh, unforgiving land, there was room for hope, respect, and humanity. As night fell and the ranch settled into calm, Thomas prepared for rest, knowing the next day would bring more work, more challenges, and perhaps more opportunities to show kindness. He believed that life was not measured by wealth or power, but by the choices one made, the help one offered, and the courage to live honestly. In the quiet of the frontier, with the wind whispering through the grass and the cattle sleeping peacefully, Thomas McAllister's humble ranch stood as a testament to the strength of character and the quiet power of a good heart. It was a life of simplicity, yes, but also a life rich in respect, compassion, and enduring hope, qualities that would soon bring unexpected visitors to his door and forever change the story of his quiet, rugged world. The next morning, the sun climbed higher in the sky, bringing warmth to the rolling plains surrounding Thomas McAllister's humble ranch. The air was filled with the sounds of life awakening, birds calling, cattle lowing, and the gentle rustle of the wind through the dry grass. Thomas had already risen, as usual, ready to face another day of work and responsibility. His hands moved with the same steady rhythm as before, guiding the cattle toward the water trough and checking the fences that marked the boundaries of his land. Though life was simple and the work demanding, Thomas had a calm confidence that came from years of understanding the land and its creatures. As he worked, a thin column of dust appeared again on the horizon. Thomas squinted, curious but cautious. Unlike the traveler he had helped before, this was not just a lone rider. There was something different about the movement. Smaller, slower, and deliberate. It was a scout, a young man riding a horse that looked tired and thirsty. Thomas had seen scouts before, part of the Apache tribes who traveled in small groups to explore or hunt. Most settlers would have gripped their weapons or hurried inside, but Thomas did neither. He simply walked down the hill toward the rider, carrying a bucket of water and a small bundle of food he had prepared that morning. The young Apache scout stopped a short distance away, unsure of what to expect. Thomas raised his hand in greeting, his voice calm and warm. "You must be thirsty. Here, have some water." The scout hesitated, glancing at the ranch and then at Thomas. His eyes were wary, but the kindness in Thomas's tone and the simple offer of water seemed to soften his suspicion. Slowly, he dismounted and drank, letting the cool liquid soothe the dryness of the long ride. Thomas then offered a small portion of bread and jerky, which the scout accepted with quiet gratitude. The exchange was simple, almost ordinary, but for Thomas it was a moment that reinforced his belief that kindness could speak louder than fear. As the scout rested, Thomas spoke gently, asking about the journey and the direction he was traveling. The young man's words were limited, and Thomas did not speak the Apache language, but there was a shared understanding. Gestures, nods, and smiles carried the meaning more clearly than words could. The scout pointed toward the hills beyond the ranch, then back at Thomas, signaling his gratitude and respect. Thomas nodded in return, offering a silent promise of safety and goodwill. He did not know it yet, but this small act of kindness would not be forgotten. The scout would return to his people and tell them about the man on the small ranch who had offered food and water without asking for anything in return. In the world of the frontier, news of such deeds traveled fast, carried by word of mouth and remembered for years. After the scout had rested, Thomas led him to the edge of the property where the trail continued. He guided the weary horse, making sure the animal could move safely over the rough terrain. When the scout finally mounted and rode off, he turned and nodded once more, a silent acknowledgement of the kindness shown to him. Thomas watched until the dust settled again on the horizon, feeling a quiet satisfaction that came not from recognition, but from simply doing what was right. He returned to his chores, repairing fences and checking the cattle, his mind already turning to the day ahead. Later that afternoon, Thomas noticed another visitor approaching from a different direction, a young woman traveling alone, carrying a small bundle on her back. Her clothes were worn, and her face showed the weariness of someone who had been on the road for days. She paused at the edge of the ranch, looking uncertainly at the simple cabin and the fences surrounding it. Thomas approached her with the same calm and friendly demeanor he offered to all who came to his land. "You look tired. Come in and rest," he said, offering water and a place to sit in the shade. The woman's relief was immediate, and she accepted the invitation gratefully. As she rested, Thomas prepared a simple meal. He offered her bread, fresh milk, and a small piece of smoked meat. She ate quickly, her eyes wide with gratitude, and told Thomas her story. She had been traveling to reach family in a distant town, but had lost her way in the heat and dust of the plains. She had no food left and was worried about making it through the night. Thomas listened carefully, nodding and asking questions about the trail ahead. When she finished, he offered guidance and reassurance, showing her the safest route to continue her journey. He gave her extra provisions to carry, making sure she would have enough to sustain her until she reached the next settlement. This simple act of hospitality was not unusual for Thomas. It was his nature to help those in need, regardless of their background or circumstances. He believed that everyone deserved a chance, that every traveler had a story worth hearing, and that kindness could create connections stronger than any wall or fence. His neighbors often criticized him for being too trusting, warning him that such generosity could lead to trouble. Yet Thomas never wavered. He had learned that fear and suspicion were easy responses, but they rarely led to understanding or peace. In his heart, he knew that showing respect and care, even to strangers, was the truest form of courage. As the day wore on, Thomas continued his work, tending to the cattle, mending fences, and preparing the land for the coming seasons. The ranch, though small and modest, was his sanctuary, a place where hard work and honesty shaped every moment. He often thought about the lessons his father had taught him, lessons of integrity, respect, and the importance of helping others whenever possible. These lessons guided him through every challenge, from droughts that threatened the grasslands to harsh winters that tested the limits of his endurance. Thomas knew that wealth was not measured in money but in character, in the strength of one's values, and in the ability to offer kindness without expecting reward. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Thomas reflected on the day's events. The small acts of kindness he had shown, the water to the scout, the meal for the traveler, felt meaningful in a way that went beyond immediate results. He understood that life on the frontier was unpredictable, that danger could arrive at any moment, and that people often judged others by fear rather than understanding. Yet he also believed that every good deed planted a seed, one that could grow into trust, friendship, and even protection in unexpected ways. He did not yet know how these seeds would sprout, but he felt a quiet confidence that one day his efforts would matter far more than he could imagine. As night settled over the ranch, the wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying the scent of earth and cattle. Thomas sat by the fire, tending to small repairs on his tools and preparing for the next day. The stars emerged, shining brightly over the open plains, each one a reminder of the vastness of the world and the countless lives intersecting with his own. In those quiet moments, he felt a deep connection to the land, to the people who traveled through it, and to the principles that guided him. Life was simple, yes, but it was also rich in meaning, shaped by choices, actions, and the small gestures that often went unnoticed but left lasting impressions. Little did Thomas know that the young scout he had helped earlier would speak of him to the Apache tribe he belonged to. Stories of the kind, humble rancher who offered water and food without expectation would spread, carried by the wind across the hills and valleys. The tribe would remember his actions, and in time, these memories would lead to a moment that would change Thomas's life forever. The seeds of trust and respect had been planted, quietly and unassumingly, in the heart of a man who believed that goodness, not fear, was the true measure of strength. Even as Thomas prepared for sleep that night, he felt a sense of quiet anticipation, though he did not know why. The frontier was full of surprises, and he had learned to face each day with patience, courage, and an open heart. His life was not easy, and the challenges were many, but he believed that kindness and honesty were powerful tools, capable of creating connections that wealth, power, or weapons never could. And in the stillness of the night, with the stars twinkling above and the wind whispering through the grass, Thomas McAllister rested, confident that the world was a place where goodness mattered, and that even the smallest gestures could leave an everlasting mark. The days passed quietly on Thomas McAllister's ranch, but the tranquility of the frontier was often fragile, easily disturbed by rumors, weather, or wandering travelers. One morning, as the sun rose over the dry hills, Thomas noticed the usual calm feeling differently. There was a weight in the air, a sense that change was approaching. His cattle grazed as usual and the wind whispered through the grass, but Thomas felt a quiet tension in the back of his mind. Living on the edge of the frontier had taught him to trust both his senses and his instincts. He had learned that the land spoke in ways that were subtle yet important. That afternoon, a neighbor, Mr. Harris, rode up to the ranch. Harris was a burly man, practical and often suspicious of anyone outside his circle. He was the kind of man who valued safety over kindness and carried his rifle as though it were part of himself. Seeing Thomas working in the fields, he called out, "Thomas, you need to hear this. There are rumors of a large Apache group moving through the plains near here. People are saying it's more than 100 strong." His voice carried worry, almost fear, and Thomas looked up from his work with calm, observant eyes. Thomas nodded slowly, wiping the sweat from his brow. "I know, Mr. Harris," he said in his steady voice. "But I've never believed in meeting fear with fear. I prefer to see what is true, not just what people say." Harris shook his head, disbelief clear on his face. "You can't be serious. If that many Apaches come near your ranch, they could—" Thomas interrupted gently. "Take what they need, yes, or they could pass without harm. I have offered kindness before, and I've seen it returned in ways people often don't expect." Harris stared at him, unable to argue, and finally turned his horse, muttering under his breath about how foolish it all seemed. Thomas returned to his work, his mind focused on both preparation and trust. As evening approached, Thomas began to prepare the ranch in small, practical ways, not for defense, but for hospitality. He filled water troughs for the cattle, ensuring they would be ready in case visitors arrived. He set aside extra food and hay, simple provisions that might be shared if needed. He knew the frontier was unpredictable, but his confidence lay in his principles. He believed that treating others with respect and offering help could prevent conflict far better than weapons or walls. In his heart, he knew that courage was not measured by the size of one's gun, but by the willingness to act with fairness, empathy, and understanding. The night came, and the ranch grew quiet, except for the occasional call of an owl or the distant howl of a coyote. Thomas sat by the fire in his cabin, repairing tools and reflecting on the day. He thought about the young Apache scout he had helped, remembering the way the scout had looked at him with a mixture of caution and gratitude. Thomas had no way of knowing it, but the scout had returned to his people, telling stories of the kind man who had offered water and food without asking for anything in return. Among the Apache, such deeds were not forgotten. They were remembered and shared, becoming part of the tribe's stories and decisions. Thomas's simple act of kindness was quietly creating bonds that might shape the events to come. Late in the night, Thomas rose to check on the cattle once more. The moon cast a silver glow over the plains, and the shadows of the hills stretched long and silent. As he walked among the animals, he thought about the rumors of a large Apache group moving through the area. Most people would have prepared weapons, locked doors, and reinforced fences, but Thomas's heart told him that fear should not control his actions. Instead, he focused on readiness in a different sense. He made sure there was food, water, and shelter, not for himself, but for anyone who might need it. In his mind, being prepared meant being ready to extend kindness, even in uncertain times. As dawn approached, Thomas's thoughts turned to the balance of life on the frontier. He reflected on the many travelers who had passed through his land, the stories they had shared, and the moments of trust and gratitude he had witnessed. He remembered the young woman who had arrived days before, worn and tired from her journey, and the way she had left with food, advice, and a renewed spirit. He understood that acts of kindness, no matter how small, had the power to ripple outward, influencing people and events far beyond what one could see. This belief shaped his every action, guiding him to live with integrity, empathy, and respect for all who crossed his path. The following morning, a small group of neighbors came riding toward the ranch, their expressions anxious. They had heard more rumors about the Apache tribe, stories of movements and gatherings far larger than anyone had anticipated. Thomas greeted them calmly, offering water and food, and listened patiently as they voiced their fears. Many urged him to prepare for defense, to arm himself, and close the gates. Thomas, however, remained thoughtful but unmoved by panic. "I respect your concern," he said, "but I will continue to live by the principles I hold. Fear will not guide my hands. Respect and kindness may do far more than weapons ever could." Some neighbors shook their heads, unable to understand his quiet confidence, while others watched in curiosity, sensing that Thomas saw the world differently. Throughout the day, Thomas went about his work as usual, tending to the cattle, repairing fences, and keeping an eye on the trails leading to his ranch. The wind carried faint whispers of movement across the plains, the distant sound of hooves and voices. Yet Thomas did not feel panic. Instead, he felt anticipation, the kind that comes from knowing that a moment of significance is approaching, even if its form is unknown. He thought about the young Apache scout and the small seeds of trust and respect he had planted through simple acts of kindness. These thoughts gave him calm courage, a quiet certainty that the world had more to offer than fear and suspicion. As evening descended, Thomas prepared a modest meal and sat on the porch, watching the sky turn deep shades of orange and pink. The ranch lay quiet, the cattle settled in the fields, and the wind carried the earthy scent of the land. Thomas reflected on the lessons he had learned in his life, the importance of integrity, of helping others, and of trusting that good deeds could create unexpected connections. He knew that life on the frontier was often harsh and unpredictable, but he also believed that compassion could transform fear into understanding and strangers into friends. He wondered what the coming days might bring, though he trusted that whatever arrived would be met with calm, patience, and respect. As night fell once more, Thomas checked his property one last time. The fence lines were secure, water troughs full, and extra provisions set aside. He looked to the horizon, sensing movement beyond the hills, faint shapes and shadows that suggested the presence of others. He did not know if they were friends or strangers, scouts or travelers, but he knew that the right approach was not one of fear, but of openness and trust. Thomas believed that when he acted with honesty and kindness, he was prepared for whatever the world sent his way. He returned to the cabin, the fire glowing warmly, and prepared for sleep, ready for the unknown events that would soon shape his life forever. In the quiet hours before dawn, Thomas's thoughts drifted to the young scout once more. The simple act of offering water and food had seemed so ordinary at the time. But Thomas understood that even ordinary acts could carry great meaning. In a world where conflict and misunderstanding were common, a single act of generosity could create ripples that spread far beyond one's immediate awareness. It was a lesson he had learned from his own life and the many travelers who had passed through the plains, and it was a lesson he would never forget. In his heart, he trusted that goodness mattered, that respect and courage could overcome fear, and that the bonds of humanity were stronger than the boundaries set by land or tribe. As the first light of dawn touched the hills, Thomas McAllister rose from his bed, ready to face the day. He did not yet know that the events of this morning would be unlike any other he had experienced. The young scout had returned to his people, sharing stories of the kind. Humble rancher who offered water and food without asking for anything in return. The Apache tribe had listened, remembering the generosity and respect shown to one of their own. Their journey across the plains would lead them to Thomas's ranch, not as conquerors, but as a group of people guided by gratitude and trust. Thomas had unknowingly prepared for this moment through years of living honestly, working diligently, and treating every person with kindness. And so, the stage was set. The humble rancher, unaware of the magnitude of what was to come, continued his daily routine, tending to the land and animals with steady hands and a calm heart. The frontier remained vast and unpredictable, but Thomas faced it with a quiet confidence rooted in integrity, empathy, and respect. In a world often defined by fear, suspicion, and conflict, he embodied the principle that courage was found in kindness, and that even a poor man with a simple ranch could leave a mark far greater than gold or weapons ever could. The coming days would test him, challenge him, and reward him in ways he could not yet imagine. But Thomas would meet them as he always had, with patience, compassion, and unwavering honesty. The first light of dawn spread slowly across the plains, painting the sky with soft shades of pink, gold, and orange. Thomas McAllister stepped out onto the porch of his humble cabin, carrying a small bucket of water for the cattle. The morning was quiet, almost serene, with only the gentle rustle of grass and the occasional crow's call breaking the silence. He had slept well, unaware that today would be unlike any other in his life. He glanced toward the horizon, scanning the rolling hills as he did every morning. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But then, far in the distance, he noticed a movement, a steady line of figures riding toward his ranch. At first, it seemed small, but as they drew nearer, the truth became clear. It was a large group, hundreds of people moving in organized formation across the open plains. Thomas's heart beat a little faster, but not with fear. Instead, he felt a quiet curiosity and a cautious hope. He stepped down from the porch and walked toward the fence, brushing dust from his hands. The riders were unmistakable. Apache warriors, their movements strong and purposeful. For a moment, Thomas considered what others would have done in his place. Many settlers, if faced with such a large force, would have locked doors, loaded rifles, and waited for an attack that might never come. But Thomas had always believed that fear was a poor guide. Instead, he chose to meet the unknown with trust and calm. He kept his gaze steady, his body relaxed, and allowed the morning light to fall on him as he observed the group approaching. The Apaches moved with a quiet strength that Thomas had seen before, but never in such numbers. There were perhaps 1,000 of them, riding horses, walking alongside families, and carrying supplies. Children clung to their parents, elders walked with dignity, and warriors rode at the front and sides, their expressions serious but not hostile. As they neared the ranch, Thomas noticed that they carried no weapons in a threatening manner. There were bows and spears, yes, but held calmly, not raised in anger or aggression. It was clear to him that they came not as attackers, but as visitors, visitors who remembered the kindness of one man. Thomas took a deep breath, steadying himself, and decided to greet them properly. He opened the gates of his ranch wide, signaling that all were welcome. It was a simple gesture, yet one that carried profound meaning. The riders slowed, and the front warriors exchanged quiet words before guiding the rest of their group toward the open yard. Thomas stepped forward, raising his hand in greeting. The leader of the group, a tall man with a calm and commanding presence, nodded in return. Thomas realized, with a mixture of awe and relief, that the man recognized him, or at least knew of his kindness through the stories carried by the young scout. The Apaches dismounted slowly, carefully, and began to gather in the yard. Families clustered together, children holding tightly to their parents' hands, and elders moved with grace despite the long ride. Thomas walked toward them with a gentle smile, carrying baskets of food he had prepared for the day. Bread, cheese, and dried meat were offered freely, and the tribe accepted them with gratitude and respect. There was no fear, no hostility, only mutual recognition of goodwill. The sight filled Thomas with wonder. He had lived his life quietly, helping travelers and neighbors, never imagining that such a moment would arrive. Yet here it was, a living testament to the power of kindness, trust, and respect. The leader of the Apaches stepped forward and spoke in a language Thomas could not fully understand, but the tone was warm and respectful. The scout, who had traveled ahead of the main group, translated what he could. "He thanks you for your kindness. He remembers your generosity. We have come to honor you and your ranch." Thomas felt a lump in his throat. He had never done anything for recognition or reward, and yet the gratitude of an entire tribe now filled the open space around his modest home. He nodded humbly, accepting their words with a quiet heart. Over the next several hours, the Apaches settled into the ranch with care and respect. They did not trample the land or harm the cattle. Instead, they moved in harmony with the surroundings, mindful of the property and animals. Thomas watched in awe as families organized themselves, setting up small areas for cooking and rest, while the warriors tended to their horses. The tribe shared stories of their travels and journeys, and Thomas listened attentively, learning about their customs, struggles, and experiences. For the first time, he felt the full weight of connection between two very different worlds, one shaped by the hardships of frontier life, the other by the strength and traditions of the Apache people. As the day progressed, the sense of celebration grew. The Apaches sang songs, rhythmic and melodic, that spoke of journeys, courage, and gratitude. Children ran across the yard, laughing and playing, while elders exchanged quiet smiles and words with Thomas. The ranch, once quiet and modest, was now filled with life, color, and the energy of a people who came not to conquer, but to honor. Thomas helped where he could, offering water to the horses, assisting with cooking, and ensuring everyone had what they needed. Though overwhelmed by the number of visitors, he never felt fear. Instead, he felt awe, humility, and a profound sense of purpose. In the afternoon, the leader of the tribe approached Thomas again, this time with a gift, a finely crafted piece of leatherwork decorated with intricate patterns. It was a gesture of respect, a way to honor the man whose kindness had inspired this visit. Thomas accepted it humbly, feeling more gratitude than pride. He realized that the gift symbolized far more than material value. It represented trust, acknowledgement, and the bonds formed through generosity. In that moment, he understood that his simple actions had ripple effects far beyond what he had imagined. One small act of kindness had created a connection strong enough to bring together an entire tribe and a humble rancher on the edge of the frontier. As evening approached, Thomas walked through the ranch. Observing the Apaches preparing for the night, fires were lit for warmth and cooking, and the smells of roasting meat and fresh bread filled the air. Children gathered around Thomas, curious and eager to hear stories of the ranch and the frontier. He spoke to them gently, teaching lessons about animals, the land, and the importance of helping others. The tribe listened, engaged not just by the words, but by the sincerity in his voice and the openness in his heart. What had begun as a quiet morning of work had transformed into a profound moment of connection, celebration, and mutual respect. Nightfall brought a calm that was different from any Thomas had experienced before. The Apaches had created a sense of peace on the ranch, their presence harmonious and respectful. As he looked out across the yard, lit by the soft glow of fires and lanterns, Thomas realized the true power of his life's philosophy, that acts of kindness, no matter how small, could create extraordinary outcomes. In the quiet of the night, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had never sought recognition or reward, yet here was a living testament to the impact of compassion and integrity. Before retiring for the night, Thomas spoke quietly with the tribe's leader. Though words were limited, their understanding was clear. Respect, gratitude, and trust transcended language. Thomas promised to continue living as he always had, honestly, humbly, and with kindness. The leader nodded, acknowledging the promise and leaving Thomas with a profound sense of peace. The day's events had changed his life forever, but Thomas remained grounded, knowing that true courage and greatness were found not in material wealth or power, but in the choices one made each day. As Thomas sat by the fire that night, listening to the soft songs and quiet laughter around him, he reflected on the journey that had brought this moment to life. The frontier had always been a place of hardship, challenge, and uncertainty, but it had also been a place of connection, courage, and unexpected friendship. The Apaches' visit was proof that even in a harsh world, kindness could bridge divides, foster trust, and create moments of beauty and understanding. The ranch, once quiet and humble, had become a symbol of what was possible when a man lived with integrity and an open heart. In the stillness of the night, Thomas realized that this day was not an ending, but a beginning. The bond formed between him and the tribe would endure, shaping the lives of everyone involved. Stories would be told, lessons remembered, and the memory of this dawn would linger long after the fires were extinguished. Thomas understood that the world was full of uncertainty, but it was also full of possibility. And sometimes, the simplest acts, a drink of water, a piece of bread, a welcoming hand, could bring about the most extraordinary events. As the stars shimmered above the ranch, Thomas McAllister finally allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He had spent his life working hard, living simply, and offering kindness without expectation. Today, that life had come full circle. The Apache's arrival at dawn had been a profound acknowledgement of his values, a testament to the idea that goodness and courage often walk hand in hand. Thomas felt humility, gratitude, and joy, knowing that his quiet, honest life had left an impact far beyond what he could ever have imagined. That night, the ranch was alive with warmth, friendship, and a sense of shared humanity. Thomas lay down in his modest cabin, the sounds of the tribe's songs and laughter echoing softly through the open fields. He closed his eyes with a heart full of hope and understanding, knowing that the world could be harsh, but it could also be beautiful. And in the early light of dawn, he had discovered the extraordinary power of simple, selfless acts, a lesson he would carry with him forever. The morning after the Apache's visit dawned with a soft glow over the plains, and Thomas McAllister rose from his modest bed with a quiet sense of fulfillment. The previous day had been unlike any he had ever experienced. The arrival of the 1,000-strong Apache tribe had filled his humble ranch with life, laughter, songs, and gratitude. It had been a moment that no one could have predicted, a testament to the power of kindness and integrity. Yet as Thomas stepped outside and looked across the land, he realized that life must continue. The cattle still needed care, the fences still needed mending, and the day demanded work. But now, his world had changed, not in wealth or possessions, but in recognition of something far more enduring: respect, trust, and connection. Even as he fed the cattle and repaired a broken post in the fence, Thomas could not help but think of the tribe and their visit. It had been a gift, a gesture of appreciation that went far beyond material terms. The Apaches had treated his home as sacred, moving with care among his animals and his land, showing a level of respect that few people could imagine. Families had gathered in his yard, children laughing as they played with the animals, and elders had shared wisdom and stories. Warriors had tended to their horses and equipment, but always with a careful eye on the surroundings, never disrupting the peace. It was clear to Thomas that their visit was not simply an acknowledgement of his past kindness, but also a bridge between two worlds, the world of the frontier settler and the world of the Apache tribe. As the day wore on, neighbors began to arrive at the ranch, curious about the extraordinary event they had heard rumors of. Word traveled quickly across the plains. The stories of Thomas's generosity and the Apache's respectful visit spread from settlement to settlement, growing with each telling. People arrived cautiously, unsure of what to expect, yet they were greeted with the same openness and calm that Thomas had always practiced. Some brought small gifts or food as a token of friendship. Others simply came to witness the remarkable harmony that had taken place on the ranch. Thomas welcomed them all, sharing his experiences, listening to their thoughts, and showing them that the world could be a place where fear did not dictate actions. In the midst of the visitors, Thomas reflected on the lesson that life had shown him repeatedly. Kindness has a way of returning in ways one can never fully anticipate. The young Apache scout he had helped months before had remembered his generosity and carried that story back to his people. The tribe had acted not out of obligation, but out of genuine respect and gratitude. Thomas had always believed that helping others, offering food, water, or a kind word, was its own reward. Yet now he understood that the consequences of such deeds could ripple outward, creating bonds of trust and mutual respect that crossed cultures and boundaries. The Apaches themselves remained at the ranch for several days, not out of necessity, but out of a desire to honor Thomas and his family. Each morning, the sounds of activity, horses moving, laughter, cooking, and music, filled the ranch with life. Thomas walked among the visitors, assisting with simple tasks, carrying water to the children, helping the elders find a comfortable place to sit, offering advice on the best way to tend the horses. He did not feel overwhelmed, for he understood that this was a rare moment of shared humanity, one that required patience, respect, and humility. The Apaches, in turn, shared stories of their journeys, their traditions, and their lives on the plains. Thomas listened intently, absorbing the lessons they offered and marveling at the wisdom contained in their words. The leader of the tribe, who had first guided the group to Thomas's ranch, spent hours with him in quiet conversation. Though their languages were different, their understanding was deep. They communicated not just with words, but with gestures, expressions, and shared experiences. The leader expressed the gratitude of his people, explaining how Thomas's actions had become part of the tribe's stories. "Your kindness," he said through the scout's translation, "is remembered. It has shown that one man's heart can make a difference in the lives of many." Thomas felt a profound sense of humility. He had never sought recognition, yet here was a man representing an entire tribe, acknowledging the value of deeds done quietly and sincerely. During the evenings, the ranch became a place of cultural exchange. Thomas learned traditional songs, dances, and even a few words in the Apache language. Children played together, laughing and running across the yard, bridging the gap between their two worlds with innocence and joy. The adults shared skills and stories, teaching one another about survival, agriculture, and the ways of the land. Thomas realized that these moments were more valuable than anything he had worked for materially. The true wealth of life, he understood, lay in these connections, in the friendships forged, the trust built, and the lessons shared. By the time the Apaches prepared to leave, the ranch had been transformed, not in structure or size, but in spirit. It was now a place where harmony, respect, and understanding had flourished. Thomas watched as the tribe organized themselves for the journey back across the plains. There was no sadness, no tension, only mutual respect and a sense of fulfillment. The leader approached Thomas once more and presented him with a symbolic gift, a finely woven blanket, rich in color and pattern. It represented gratitude, honor, and recognition of the courage it takes to act with kindness in a world that often rewards fear and suspicion. Thomas accepted the gift with humility, understanding that it was more than an object. It was a testament to the enduring value of integrity and compassion. As the Apaches departed, their figures slowly disappearing over the hills, Thomas felt a quiet peace settle over the ranch. He returned to his chores, feeding the cattle, mending fences, and preparing the land for future seasons. But the spirit of the visit remained. The lessons of generosity, respect, and courage had been reinforced, not just for him, but for everyone who had witnessed the event. His neighbors, who had once doubted his methods, now looked at him with newfound understanding. They saw that fear need not dominate the frontier, and that kindness, when genuine and consistent, could create bonds stronger than any walls or weapons. Thomas also understood the lasting impact on his family. His children, who had watched the Apaches arrive and interact with him, learned an invaluable lesson: that bravery is not measured by strength alone, but by the courage to act rightly, to extend help without expectation, and to respect those who are different. These lessons, he knew, would shape the next generation, teaching them the value of empathy, patience, and honor. The story of the Apaches' visit would live in their hearts, reminding them that even a poor rancher, living quietly on the edge of the frontier, could leave a legacy of goodness that transcends time and circumstance. As weeks passed, Thomas continued his life as he always had, tending to the ranch with diligence and care. Yet the memory of the visit remained vivid in his mind. He reflected on the extraordinary events, realizing that the Apaches had not come as conquerors, but as friends and allies. Their visit had been an acknowledgement of his principles, a living demonstration that integrity and compassion are forces stronger than fear or misunderstanding. Thomas understood that life on the frontier would always present challenges, but the bonds he had formed with the tribe would endure, offering both practical support and profound lessons about humanity. In the months that followed, Thomas became known far and wide for his courage and generosity. Travelers, settlers, and even distant tribes spoke of the man whose kindness had drawn 1,000 Apaches to his ranch at dawn. Yet Thomas remained humble, never seeking fame or reward. He continued his simple life, living by the principles that had guided him for so long: honesty, respect, and the willingness to help others without expectation. For him, the true reward had always been the knowledge that he had acted rightly, and that his deeds had inspired trust, goodwill, and harmony. One evening, as Thomas sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the hills, he reflected on the events that had transformed his life. The visit of the Apaches had been a reminder that courage often lies in the smallest acts: a drink of water, a piece of bread, a welcoming gesture. It was a lesson in the power of human connection, one that transcended fear, prejudice, and the harsh realities of frontier life. Thomas understood that his actions had created a ripple effect, one that would be remembered by those who had been touched by his kindness. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that his life, though humble, had made a meaningful difference. As night fell and the stars stretched across the sky, Thomas McAllister looked out over the land he had tended for so many years. The ranch, modest and simple, had become a symbol of hope, trust, and understanding. He knew that life would continue to present challenges, but he was confident that he had the strength, integrity, and compassion to meet them. The story of the 1,000 Apaches who had come to his ranch at dawn would live on, not as a tale of wealth or power, but as a testament to the enduring value of kindness. And in that quiet moment, with the wind whispering through the grass and the night settling over the plains, Thomas felt a profound sense of peace. The legacy of his actions would extend far beyond his lifetime. Travelers would continue to tell the story of the poor rancher whose kindness had drawn an entire tribe to his door. Children would grow up hearing the tale, learning that bravery is not measured by weapons or wealth, but by integrity and compassion. The land itself, tended with care and respect, would stand as a witness to the power of one man's choices, the influence of generosity, and the bonds created by simple human goodness. Thomas understood that his life, though modest in possessions, had become rich in meaning, impact, and love. In the quiet solitude of his cabin, Thomas McAllister finally allowed himself to rest fully, confident that the world was a place where goodness mattered. The visit of the Apaches had confirmed what he had always known, that acts of kindness, no matter how small, could create connections that change lives, build trust, and inspire hope. His heart was full, not of pride, but of gratitude, for the land, for the people he had met, for the lessons he had learned, and for the understanding that life's true rewards are measured in the goodness we leave behind.